We're doing Igeres Kedesh Simon Chof, which is, of course, one of the most important Igeres Kedesh of the Alter Rebbe. And it's a very difficult Igeres Kedesh. It's a very deep, mystical / scholarly Igeres Kedesh. And the detail that's always added when we discuss this Igeres Kedesh is that this Igeres Kedesh, the Alter Rebbe wrote Korev Lizman His Talkusei. Alter Rebbe wrote it shortly before he passed away. The Alter Rebbe wrote this Igeres Kedesh. Korev Lizman His Talkusei. The Alter Rebbe geshuvim them Igeres Kedesh. And it encompasses actually one of the most important ideas of Hasidus Chabad. And that's the idea of Dirol Yisbarach B'Tachtenim, that the most important thing is action. Action may be the lowest madrega, but it's the most important thing. And that's the spirit of this Igeres HaKedesh, to bring out the idea that in Gashmis you have Atzmus, in physical world you have essence of the Rebishter, and therefore it becomes the most important thing. Now, the Alter Rebbe, before he passed away, wrote a short letter and this long letter. The short letter is called Nefesh HaShfeila, and it's printed I think it's printed in Mei HaShorim. The Rebbe has it in Lekutei Sichos. And there also the Alter Rebbe talks about the Maila of Asiyah and the fact that even though people are not perfect, it's better for a person to live and be imperfect than not to exist at all because of the Maila of Mitzvahs Ma'asiyos. But the Nefesh HaShfeila is not included in the Tanya. This Igeres HaKedesh, however, is. So this is Igeres HaKedesh, but the Maila of Gashmias, because in Gashmias have Atzmos. And the key term in this Igeres HaKedesh is the word Yeshus. Yesh. The physical world, which is the lowest of all the world, has the Maila of Yeshus. And because of the Maila of Yeshus, it's connected to the truth of Hashem, who is also called Yesh. All the spiritual worlds are called Ayin. Ayin means every world feels its source, feels connected to its higher level. Because it feels connected to its higher level, it's bottled to the higher level. And even the way the world actually manifests and becomes a separate entity, it continues to be aware of its source, and to a lesser degree, this bittul. Alter Rebbe is going to call this B'kitzur Nimrat Ila V'Yalo, the law of cause and effect. Cause and effect works that you look at the effect and it can be retraced to the source. Dafke Yeshus, something which exists in a way that does not know its source, has a maila that it comes from Eibishter himself. And the Havana Shabbat of it is, the explanation is, you cannot give somebody something you yourself don't possess. So all the spiritual worlds are bottled to the higher worlds. This idea that bottled to the higher worlds is true of the Eibishter's light, not of the Eibishter. The Eibishter's light is bottled to the Eibishter. Therefore the Shtalshalos is bottled to the higher worlds. The Gashmias world is Yesh. Yesh means it denies its source. It's designed by Hashem to be separate. Where does Yeshus come from? It can't come from the spiritual world. It can't even come from the spiritual light. It can't even come from Ein Sof. Because all the spiritual worlds, their identity is bittul. You cannot give somebody something you don't possess yourself. So how does Yeshus exist? Begashmias, if in the Ruchniistic world there is no Yeshus. Now you know and I know that the Yeshus of the Gashmiistic world is a lie. Because the truth is that everything is one with Hashem, including the Gashmiistic world. But although the Yeshus of the physical world may be false, even false Yeshus is Yeshus. It's still a sense of independence, a sense of self-identity. And this Alter Rebbe is going to ask the question, where does Yeshus come into the Gashmiistic world? And the answer is going to be, Yeshus in the Gashmiistic world comes directly from the Eibishter himself. This lowest world, which is designed by Hashem to deny Hashem altogether, Yeshus, is rooted in the Yesh of Hashem. Hashem's Yesh is called Yesh HaAmiti, the true ego, because Hashem is in fact independent, he has no dependency. This world is called Yesh HaNivra because it's not a true ego, it's a false ego. We're very dependent, we just don't know it. But Dr. Rebbe is going to explain that the fact that there's Yeshus here is a sign that it's rooted in the Yeshus of Atzmos and Hossein Baruch Hu. And ultimately Dr. Rebbe is going to explain that the Yeshus that exists down here is the reason this world has a maila of all the Eilim HaYonim, and that the Iker world of purpose as far as the Eibush is concerned is the physical world where we serve Hashem doing physical mitzvahs. And to use a lashon which is brought in Maimorim from the Marash, that you reveal in the Yesh HaNivra, the Yesh HaMiti, in the Yeshus of our world, you reveal the truth of Hashem, which doesn't have a possibility and therefore cannot be revealed in the spiritual worlds. So this is the point. This Igeres HaKedesh talks about Yeshus, ego, sense of independence. The physical world has a sense of ego, self-independence of Yeshus, and it's rooted in the Yeshus of the Eibishter himself. The question, of course, becomes, how does the Yeshus go from there to here? If everything inside the Shtalshalos is Ayin, or everything inside the Shtalshalos is Ilaval, every world inside the Shtalshalos knows its source, and therefore has a certain measure bittul to its source, they can't give us Yeshus that they don't have. So how does Yeshus come down to the physical world if it doesn't exist in the spiritual world? And the answer that the Rebbe is going to give has two parts. The first part of the answer is that the Yeshus comes to the physical world through what's called Oir, the light of Hashem. It has a quality of Yeshus which is manifest only when it comes to the bottom line. And the second aspect is going to be Malchus of Atzilus, the combination of Oir Ein Sof, together with Malchus of Atzilus, combined to contribute to the creation of Yeshus in the physical world. And now we're going to begin to read the text of the Igeres HaKodesh Siman Chof. The Alter Rebbe begins by quoting it to Kun Ezeir. Iyu v'chayehi chad, iyu v'gamei chad b'hein. Hashem and the light is one, and the Hashem and the vessels are one in them. Okay, Pirush, this means that as a sphere is the Atzilus, the 10 spheres as they exist in Atzilus. Chayei, the life, hein ha'eres, which is the light. V'gamei, and the vessels, the limbs, hein makel, which is the vessels. Shekul, no lakus, they're all godliness. And because they're all godliness, there's a concept of Iya v'chayei echad, Iya v'gamei echad, ma'ashe'enkin, be'biyah v'chuli, as opposed to the words of B'riyah Tir Nasi. Now later on, the Alter Rebbe is going to say a little different, that also biyah is an Indian of Iya v'chayei echad, Iya v'gamei echad, to create yesh me'ayin and B'riyah Tir Nasi. But in the meantime, he says, ma'ashe'enkin be'biyah. Now, very, very important observation. Iya v'chayei echad, Iya v'gamei echad is a statement to Kun Ezeir. It's a statement of Ezeir. And it means basically that Atzilus is godliness, the vessels of Atzilus are godliness, the light of Atzilus is godliness, but there's another thing. The vessels of Atzilus are godliness in one way, but because of the connection of the vessels to the light, the vessels are more godly because of the link to the light. Moreover, the light of Atzilus is godliness, but because the light of Atzilus is connected to super Elokus, higher than Atzilus, so therefore the godliness of the light of Atzilus is even more than the light of Atzilus is by itself, because of its connection to higher. In other words, Atzilus is godly, but because of the dveikus of Atzilus to Ein Sof, it's more godly than it would be otherwise. It's called Iya v'chayei echad, Iya v'gamei echad. So I want you to understand something. This statement, Iya v'chayei echad, Iya v'gamei echad, is constant. Atzilus is perpetually in a state of Zeikos Elokus. This is always true. The chid of this Igeres HaKodesh is that there's another concept in Iya v'chayei echad, Iya v'gamei echad. The second concept of Iya v'chayei echad v'gamei echad is different than the first concept, because the second concept of Iya v'chayei echad v'gamei echad is not constant. In simple words, Atzilus itself is in a constant state of Iya v'chayei echad v'gamei echad. In this Igeres HaKodesh, we're not going to talk about the constant Iya v'chayei echad. We're going to talk about the temperate Iya v'gamei echad. And as it's explained in my modern, this goes on Dafkan Chitzenius HaKelim. Pnimius HaKelim on a perpetual Ma'amad D'Matzav V'chayei v'gamei echad. And the Alter Rebbe here is talking a new concept. V'tzarich lahavin heitiv. We need to explain well. Eich, how could you say that Ein Sof Chadei V'gamei Hein HaKelim? That Ein Sof is one with vessels. Harei HaKelim bechinas gvul v'tachlis mishkos ha'beitz chayim. The vessels of Atzilus are limited and with a specific purpose, it says in Kabbalah. And therefore, how could Hashem, which means Maitzel, Ein Sof Shalman Atzilus, and the lights of Atzilus and the vessels of Atzilus be one? How could something infinite and essentially godly be one with something which is limited with a specific purpose? And the Alter Rebbe answers, the answer is, Loimar, to say, that they're godly in as much of creating as Yesh Me'ayin is concerned. In other words, Be'etzem the not Elokus. But in as much as creating Yesh Me'ayin is concerned, they're Elokus K'maya Ein Sof. V'loi, and not that the way the Eid and the Keli come together in Atzilus is to be able to create Yesh Mayayin. Yesh Mayayin means an entity which exists in a way that's separate from its source, rather than simply Ilo v'Yolo. Ilo v'Yolo means the laws of cause and effect, where you look at the effect and you know the cause. You look at the second level, you know its source. But the light becomes one with the Kelim in order to affect Yesh Mayayin, the idea of Yesh Mayayin. And the pshat, in other words, is that there is maybe, the Alter Rebbe here doesn't go into it, an aspect in Atzilus which is in a constant state of Iya v'chayei v'gamei echad, but there's another aspect which is Iya v'chayei v'gamei echad in as much as creating Yesh Mayayin is concerned. Okay? It says in Kabbalah, we're saying here that the light and Hashem and the vessels are one to create Yesh Mayayin. But we know from sources in Kabbalah that as a spheres of Atzilus, which means the light and the vessels, are called Ila v'Yolo, cause and effect, and not Yesh Meyayin. Okay? V'cheinu b'zeya, this is a Ramak. That Atzilus from Chochmah to Bina and so forth is Ila v'Yolo, not Yesh Meyayin. So Alter Rebbe answers, Hainu, when is it true that the 10 spheres of Atzilus are only cause and effect? And again, the type of cause and effect means you look at the lower level and you know its source and so forth. The way the vessels of Atzilus are creating the next sphera in Kalim, in Atzilus itself. In Atzilus itself, we're going from Chochmah to Bina, it's an Ina v'Ila v'Yolo, because they're all relative to each other. And you look at the lower level, you can know the higher level. That Shinekrais, that all of them, all the 10 spheres, are called Bli Ma, B'Sefer Yetzirah. They have no self-identity in Kabbalah. In other words, She'einam b'chinas Yesh u'Muhus Musad. They're not yet a separate identity from Elokus, and something which can be comprehended because of its form and because of its limitation. So in as much as the spheres are not yet Yesh, and not yet Muhus Musad, but rather they're Bli Ma, in other words, the spheres are Elokus, over there you say Ila v'Yolo, or K'maya Ein Sof, like the Ein Sof itself. That Leis Machshav Tfisa Beklal, nobody can understand the Ein Sof because it's beyond comprehension. Or K'maya Shekosov, as the Pasuk says, B'negei Moshe Rabbeinu, Afani Le'ero, you cannot say the Pnimis of Elokus. Unavuas Moshe Rabbeinu Alav Shalom V'Asagasa, the prophecy of Moshe Rabbeinu, what he reached through prophecy, Hoyth Mipei Ke'elin, the Netzach Zah was only from the He of Zah. And understand that this point clearly links Iger Zakedesh Chaf with the Iger Zakedesh test, which we learned on Thursday night, where the Alter Rebbe over there explains the whole Inyan of Nevuas Moshe and why Moshe Rabbeinu gave the Torah, Nevis Chochmah Shalom Maila, and so forth. Okay, so godliness is incomprehensible because it's infinite. So the Alter Rebbe says like this: in as much as the spheres are godly, you say Hishtalshus Spheres b'Spheres Atzma. In other words, the madrega of spheres, which we cannot comprehend, you say that the lower level has a relativism to the higher level. And the Alter Rebbe says, Ubehishtalshus ha'olu, Ubehishtalshus, and in the chain reaction of Hishtalshus, of cause and effect, where a lower level and a higher level are relative to one another, we say ha'olul hu mukif meha'ila, the effect is surrounded by the cause. Ubatal b'metiyah, it's lost in its form in it. Kizev Hashemesh b'Shemesh, as the rays of the sun are in the sun, K'moshikosav b'pardes me'aramak, this is above from the Ramak. So every effect, the way it's one with its cause, like a lower idea of seichel and a higher idea of seichel, is completely bottled. And even the way it comes out, v'afgam, and even when it comes out, when the cause and the effect separate, so even then you could look at the effect and know the cause. V'afgam tzimtzum rabba miyed, and therefore, even if you have numerous contractions, lo yi'il, they will not suffice liyais to create geshem of a physical dense metius, kafir as earth, in other words, something physical, that the nature of its existence that is defined only by itself. Me'ishtalshlis haruchnis, they're going a chain reaction of developing spirituality from a higher level to a lower level. Misichlim nivdalim, from abstract intellectuals, afilu shalom malach, even from malach. For sure, from Sfidus, which is alakus, you can't get a davar gashmi. But even from malachim, who are nivrayim, you cannot create a davar gashmi, only davar ruchni. Ella liyes ruach abheim pnei sheir, only to create the soul of an animal from the malach of pnei sheir, k'mo shkosav mokamacher, v'ayin sham, look in another place. So therefore, in ruchnius, you can say ila v'yalo, and in elokus, you also say ila v'yalo. In other words, the way a higher sphere comes down to a lower sphere, on a level where it's godly and beyond comprehension, over there you could say ila v'yalo. But we're not talking about that idea. So again, it says in Zayar, Hashem, the light and the vessels are one. So how could that be? And the answer is, they're one in as much as Yesh Ma'ayin is concerned. So I'm repeating on myself again. In Pnimius of Atzilus, that's a perpetual state. The Eris and the Kalim are one with you all the time. But in Chitanius HaKalim, which is the Kalim are Mamash Gvul, so the idea of has only been engaged to Yesh Ma'ayin. In other words, it's not one in a perpetual state. It's one in as much as creating Yesh Ma'ayin is concerned. Okay? Because in Alakus, there's only Ila v'Yalu and not Yesh Ma'ayin. And the Alter Rebbe concludes today's shir with the words V'yesh Ma'ayin Niked B'Yev Lashon HaKedesh. And creating something in a way that it's a Yesh. It's created by Hashem. It's created to Shaydir Ishtalshlus. But the way it was created in such a way that it should be separated from its source. In other words, you look at the creation and you do not know where it came from. This is called yesh me'ayin, this is bria. In other words, ila v'yol and yesh me'ayin mean exactly the same thing. Ila means cause, ola means effect. Ayin means cause and yesh means effect. The difference is ila no is cause and effect. We look at the effect. First of all, the effect is bottled to the cause. And even the way the effect comes out of the cause, it still has a connection to the cause. Ayin and yesh, when the yesh comes out of the ayin, it's totally separated. And there's an inyan and iya v'chayev, which is the basis for this process of creating yesh me'ayin. Okay, this is the point of the shir of the first day of Rosh Hashanah. That's it.